Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our second workshop to hear about the 5-year update to the Lower East Coast Water Supply Plan. My name is Tom Colios. I'm the Water Supply Planning Section Lead at the district, and I'll be the moderator for today's stakeholder workshop. This Zoom meeting is being recorded, and within a few days, the recording will be made available to the public. The presentations you see here today have been posted to the district's Lower East Coast Water Supply Plant website if you want to view them again. Again, thanks for joining us today. The stakeholder workshop will focus on natural systems, environmental protection tools, restoration activities, and climate resiliency through 6 different presentations. I'll talk about the plan update process a little bit, timeline and progress we've made since our first stakeholder meeting. James Behrens will talk about the resource protection tools that the district uses. Leslie Waugh will give an update of the Everglades restoration projects. Pete Kwiatkowski will describe our groundwater modeling efforts and saltwater interface mapping project. Carolina Moran will provide an overview of the district's resiliency program. And then Nancy, our Lower East Coast Plan Manager, will finish up with the next steps in the planning process. Under the Zoom format, all attendees are muted. However, we still want to hear from you. We will have a question and comment period at key points during the workshop, so please hold your questions until those points. Your comments and thoughts are critical to ensure the plan update addresses your issues and concerns, so I encourage you to share those with us. I'll now give a brief description of the plan update process, followed by progress since our first workshop was held in May. This plan update will follow the Florida statute requirements, which states that water management districts need to identify sufficient water supply sources and future projects to meet existing and future reasonable beneficial uses during a 1 in 10-year drought for a minimum of 20 years, while sustaining water resources and natural systems. You can see on the map, the Lower East Coast planning area includes all of Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade counties, most of Monroe County, and portions of Collier and Hendry counties. In addition, reservations for the Seminole and Miccosukee tribes are in the planning area. You can also see that Lake Okeechobee touches 4 of our planning areas. However, Lake Okeechobee is formally included and addressed in this Lower East Coast Water Supply Plan, which is currently being updated. BEBR, or the Bureau of Economic and Business Research, estimates a population of almost 7.3 million people by 2045 in the planning area, which is a little over 1 million increase from 2021. Our first workshop described in detail about the population, agricultural, and all demand projections. This planning horizon for this plan update is 2021 through 2045. And this planning area obviously also includes significant environmental features such as the Greater Everglades system, Biscayne Bay, and Florida Bay, among others. And you'll hear a lot more details about that today. Now I want to talk a little bit about what a water supply plan does do and what they do not do. Simply speaking, a water supply plan is a proactive approach towards water supply. We know there will be increased needs for water in the future and potential shortfalls. So water supply plans provide us a roadmap to get ahead of those demands by identifying sources and strategies now on how those demands will be met while protecting our natural resources. Approval of the plan triggers a requirement for local governments to update their 10-year water facilities work plan within 18 months of plan approval. Although the plan does not establish minimum flows and minimum water levels, which are adopted by rule, the MFL prevention and recovery strategies are included in the water supply plans. And again, you'll hear more details about those today. A little bit about our timeline. We need participation from all our stakeholders to get input during the planning process, because this provides a balanced approach to reflect the needs of the planning area. We have multiple meetings to solicit input and participation in group stakeholder meetings, as well as during governing board meetings. Also, meetings with individual stakeholders give us more details to consider and incorporate into the plan update. You can see on the graphic here that we're at the end of August, and at our second stakeholder meeting, we've released some early chapters for public review and comment. Those comments are due at the end of September. Then we want to post the rest of the draft plan for public review and comment at the end of the year, before our final stakeholder meeting sometime in February, along with a governing board meeting. And we'll bring it in for final governing board approval in April of 2024. All right, some things that we've been doing since our first meeting. We've been diligently writing chapters and compiling data for appendices. 2 weeks ago, we posted chapters 1, 2, and 3 and Appendix A on our website and sent out a notice to stakeholders. Hopefully you received those notices. These draft documents allow the public the opportunity to begin reviewing the plan update in parts, rather than 400 pages all at once near the end of the process. And Chapter 2 and Appendix A provide the demand estimates and projections for the 6 water use categories. And we talked about that in our first workshop, those numbers. Please provide your written comments for those draft chapters by September 29th. You can see here on the graphic, on the list of the draft chapters and appendices. As I indicated, the ones with asterisks are the ones that have been posted for public review. All right. Does anyone have any comments for what I've presented so far? We have a lot of participants, so we request that you hold your comments to around 3 minutes. But if you have a question or a comment, please use the raise your hand feature. The instructions are on the screen. If you're participating by phone, *9 will raise your hand, and *6 will mute and unmute your phone.
We have one hand raised. Rajendra?
Yeah, I cannot see the screen completely. I just see a part of it. So I was just wondering, is it the setting on my side or is it like that? Because the zoom level probably is high on your side. So I just see like a 10% or 25% of the screen here on my side.
Does anyone else have that same issue? We have others that are online here and they're seeing the whole screen. Devon, are you seeing the whole screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, probably just me then. All right, thank you.
Okay.
I see Paul Gray has his hand raised. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, thank you. So I noticed that there were only 3 chapters available so far, and I think there's 9. Is there a schedule for when the other chapters will be available?
Yeah, we had that. Let me go back a few.
All right, thank you.
Why is it not going back? Oh, I gotta click here maybe. In December or January-ish, in that time frame, at the end of the year, first part of next year, we're going to post the entirety of the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
No other hands raised.
No other hands raised. Okay. I'll pass it on then to James.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is James Behrens. I'm a lead scientist with the South Florida Water Management District. This morning, I'm going to be discussing the water resource protections in place that we currently have, and this will be overlooking the entire district, but mostly focusing on the lower East Coast planning area. So water resource protection tools are divided up into several categories. They're first regulated by consumptive use permitting. We also have the minimum flows and minimum water levels program, often referred to as MFLs. In addition, we have two tools that are applied specifically for SERP restoration projects. Those include water reservations and restricted allocation areas. All of these tools are currently adopted by rule, Florida Administrative Code. You'll see that FAC abbreviation. That's just referring to the specific chapter in the code book. And then also more than one tool can protect a water body. So I'll show several maps that indicate which tools are covering which areas. So this is another way of looking at the resource protections that are in place. It's more of a conceptual model. The areas that I'm going to be focused on today are highlighted in red. There are also additional tools in different departments that cover water shortage and general consumptive use permit rules. But when a new application comes in for a consumptive use permit, all 5 of these tools are assessed for protections required to issue that permit to see if it can be approved. So the minimum flows and water levels program I'll start out with, that is the point we are identifying thresholds at which further withdrawals can cause significant harm to the water resources. That significant harm threshold is defined as a loss of water resource functions. It takes more than 2 years to recover, but is less severe than serious harm. So these protections are in place to not even approach that serious harm level. They can be adopted for surface waters or aquifers. We use best available information. That includes all of the district's hydrological monitoring data on DB Hydro. That includes all of the science teams monitoring data on the specific resources and ecology of the area, and also established peer-reviewed science. We also issue an annual MFL priority water body list that details the water bodies that we will be focusing on for the current calendar year. And 2 examples of these water bodies there, we divide them up into either prevention or recovery. And I'll get into that in the next slide, where we have a recovery water body here listed as Loxahatchee River and the prevention water body, Florida Bay. Diving in a little bit more into the terminology and the concepts here. So as we increase in drought severity on the left going down, we've got various systems in place to protect water. So when we get into a phase 1, phase 2 water shortage, that's harm. So harm is defined as anything, a recovery lasting less than 2 years. And the minimum flows and water levels program is really designed to prevent that from exceeding 2 years. So any harm that exceeds 2 years would be defined as significant harm. And that's where we're kind of operating most of the time. We use that program so that we don't even venture into the serious harm category, which would be the irreversible loss of those water resource functions in a phase 4 water shortage. Just to note, we do use that 1 in 10 level of certainty so that we do expect there to be some drought years in the system. However, that should not exceed a 1 in 10 year drought condition. So looking at the recovery and prevention strategies, those are every time that we establish a minimum flow and level water body, they are either put into the recovery strategy category or the prevention strategy category. So the recovery strategy would be those not meeting the MFL at the time of adoption. And oftentimes, as in this water supply plan, we're looking out for 20 years. And so if we're not currently meeting that MFL, it goes into recovery, and a recovery strategy is issued at that time simultaneously with the MFL rule adoption. Alternatively, there's the prevention strategy, which is the strategy that is used if the water body is meeting the MFL, but is not expected to meet it in 20 years. So, and whenever an MFL is established, it's either put in one of these 2 categories. And that is, again, that prevention strategy is to prevent the existing flow or level from falling below the MFL. And those strategies are included in the water supply planning process. So as we go through the various water bodies in the lower East Coast planning area, I'll discuss the MFL and then provide the recovery or prevention strategy that's associated with it. These are a list of all the current MFLs in the South Florida Water Management District. In total, they protect approximately 6.6 million acres. You can see they're often layered on top of each other. So we've got protection over the Biscayne Aquifer. In addition, you can see that there's overlapping protection of the surface water in the Everglades, and that includes also that same thing can be applied to the West Coast, but just focusing on the lower East Coast, you can see all of the different MFLs that are applied here. And so I'll go through the two prevention water bodies in the lower East Coast on the top, and then the three recovery strategies and MFLs on the bottom there. So to start off, there is an MFL associated with the Biscayne Aquifer. The criteria for that MFL is that we don't want water to basically drop below a level that allows salt water to extend into the groundwater supply. So anytime at that withdrawal point where you see on the figure on the right, where you see that intrusion of salt water into the well, that basically makes the water undrinkable and is considered a violation. So a violation occurs when the water level in the aquifer produces this movement at any point in time. So we don't want to contaminate the water supply. You can see on the next map here, these are all the stations that are currently monitored. That's part of the prevention strategy. So this monitoring network utilizes data to initiate water shortage actions. Those are all in Florida Administrative Code. We also apply conditions for permit issuance to prevent harmful movement of saltwater at the saltwater interface, as defined in the consumptive use permitting criteria. So in addition, part of that recovery strategy is to construct and operate water resource and water supply development projects. So we have the 2008 Regional Water Availability Rule, which focuses on alternative water sources and conservation. And we also have a number of projects that act as countermeasures to saltwater intrusion through the Everglades Restoration Project, also called SERP. And I'll discuss more about the Everglades projects later in the presentation. We also conduct research in high-risk areas to identify where saltwater interface is adjacent to existing and future potable water sources. So Pete's going to talk a little bit more about that later. We periodically map saltwater intrusion into those coastal aquifers and identify those high-risk areas. Turning to the next MFL, which is Florida Bay. This is the second one that we have currently in prevention. So this criteria requires over a 360-day period for 105,000 acre feet to flow across the landscape and into the bay. And that is to keep the salinity at a baseline level that allows the estuarine condition to thrive. So we're trying to stay under salinity of 30 primary salinity units, or PSU. And that average is calculated over 30 days. So we don't want that 30-day average to creep above 30. It gets too saline and hinders the production of seagrass in that area. So this MFL was reevaluated in 2014, and it did conclude that MFL criteria were adequate for preventing significant harm, and there's been zero violations since. I'll highlight this project a little bit at the end of the presentation, just to discuss some of the progress that's been made in this area. So looking at further into the details of this MFL, as I mentioned, the exceedance occurs when we've got that 30-day moving average above 30 PSU at the Taylor River Salinity Monitoring Station. That's a kind of a mixed brackish station that's in Everglades National Park. So anytime we have multiple events occurring within a single calendar year are considered a single exceedance. However, an MFL violation will occur when we've got an exceedance happening in 2 consecutive years. That's like a back-to-back exceedance. We don't want that happening more than once in a 10-year period, or we drift into that significant harm category. Oftentimes, that how many events you're experiencing within a certain period is referred to as return frequency. So looking specifically at the Florida Bay prevention strategy, there have been 3 projects completed that have delivered more water to Florida Bay. So that has been the Mod Waters project, C111 Spreader Canal, and the C111 South Dade project. Other projects currently in the planning stages are the Central Everglades Planning Project, referred to as CEP, And in addition, we continue to our field monitoring programs and research to assess salinity, water levels, flow conditions, and biological resource responses in the region. So the adopted MFL is for the Everglades, includes the lands highlighted here in the brown area. They include lands in waters of the water conservation areas, the Holy Land Rotenberger wildlife management areas, and the freshwater portions of Everglades National Park. Digging in a little deeper, it's all tied to the soils. So we don't want water dropping below or a foot below or a foot and a half below specific areas in the Everglades that can harm those peat and marl prairie soil formation. And so that is the focus of this MFL. And it's assessed at 20 different sites across the Everglades landscape. And when we look at violations, we don't want more than one exceedance in 2 to 5 years for marl forming, and more than one exceedance in 10 years in the peat forming wetlands. So the recovery strategy associated with the Everglades, we've got to implement measures in the LSC water supply plan, which will be detailed in the reports in the chapters that are issued, and start to more closely approximate pre-drainage conditions. We're applying consumptive use and water shortage requirements, removing conveyance limitations, and implementing revised CNFS project. The idea is to store additional fresh water, reserving water for the protection of fish and wildlife, and developing alternative sources for water supply. Looking next to the Lake Okeechobee adopted MFL, an exceedance occurs when we've got lake levels declining below 11 feet for greater than 80 consecutive or non-consecutive days during an 18-month period. That 18-month period cannot include more than one wet season, and a violation is triggered when we're getting exceedances more than once every 6 years. So it was mentioned at the first meeting that we have looked at some of the planning and the projects, and that there is not enough currently additional water available to move out of recovery and into prevention. So we're still working on that one. The current recovery strategy is tied to these 4 components. So we've got environmental enhancement projects, which include native vegetation planning, sediment scraping, and prescribed burns. We've also got lake water consumptive use constraints, such as the restricted allocation areas. We implement water restrictions, phases 1 through 4 as needed. And also there are capital projects underway to improve storage capacity in and adjacent to the lake. So again, these will be more detailed in the report that's issued, including the entire Lake Okeechobee watershed restoration project and the ASR wells, and this the Hoover Dike repair, and then the revised lake regulation schedule. Turning to the northwest fork of the Loxahatchee River, and that is our adopted MFL, is related to the flow of water over Lanehart Dam. An exceedance occurs either when that flow drops below 35 CFS for 20 consecutive days. We saw that happen earlier in this year. And also it's triggered when there's a salinity at river mile 9.2 that is greater than 2 PSU, and that's calculated as a 20-day moving average. And the violation for this MFL is when either of those conditions occurs more than once in a 6-year period. So we're currently experiencing some violations there, but there are, again, there's a recovery strategy that is addressing those violations at this time. So this is an overview of the recovery strategy. We're providing structural improvements to increase water storage and delivery capabilities. These would be the G160 and 161 structure projects, which are right here, these two. We've also got operational protocols at G92 to provide flows greater than 50 CFS at Lanehart Dam when supplies are available. So that would be above the MFL. And then additional regulatory programs, water shortage plans, and then also the North Palm Beach County and Loxahatchee River watershed restricted allocation area. So this whole thing right here is the restoration project, all the different projects. In addition to the MFLs, we have another tool that we can use, which are water reservations. This sets aside water for the protection specifically of fish and wildlife or public health and safety. It's a volumetric measurement, and it's based on having scientifically defensible determination of the water needed for the ecology of the area. It reserves water from allocation to consumptive uses, and it is a statutory requirement for the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan in the agreements that we have with the Army Corps of Engineers. There is one water reservation currently in the lower East Coast planning area. That's the nearshore Central Biscayne Bay, which was established in 2013. This is a map of that area. So all surface water contained within the nearshore Central Biscayne Bay is protected. In addition, the surface water flowing into nearshore Central Biscayne Bay, and that's, like I mentioned before, a reservation for the protection of fish and wildlife. In addition, it protects water needed for CERT Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands Project Phase 1. And so that what you're looking at here is the area within Biscayne Bay up to 400 or 500 meters from the shoreline off into the coast. So it's going to be that hatched yellow area along the coast here that provides protection. And then finally, we're looking at our third tool, which is the use of restricted allocation areas. So that protects approximately 4.4 million acres throughout the district, highlighted in the map here. It's implemented when there is a lack of water available to meet projected needs of the region. It restricts new or increased consumptive use allocations. It doesn't restrict allocation to consumptive use, just new or increased. That's an important distinction. I'll get into on the next slide. It covers large geographic areas and multiple ecosystems. So we've got examples include the Everglades, Lake Okeechobee, and Loxahatchee. Public interest considerations are often guided by the governing board, who have a diverse set of stakeholder groups, and it protects future water made available for natural system by the CERT projects. And if you want more information on this listed in section 3.2.1 of the applicant's handbook. So specifically, these RAs in the lower East Coast planning area, as I mentioned, they don't permit additional water or consumptive use from certain timeframes. So for the L1, L2, and L3, there's been no increases in consumptive use since 1981. In the lower East Coast Everglades and Loxahatchee River watersheds, we're looking at historic water use is permitted up to the levels that were used in 2006 and not beyond. And then for Lake Okeechobee, we're looking at historic water use is permitted that occurred from 2001 to 2008. So as I showed in the map, these water bodies can be protected by multiple tools. For Lake Okeechobee, we've got an MFL and then a restricted allocation area. Same for the Everglades and Biscayne Aquifer, and also for the Loxahatchee River. And in sum, these tools protect about 7.4 million acres, or about 69% of our district. And this is a visual representation of all of the protection tools in place. So we are protecting approximately 10 million acres across our district from those increased consumptive use levels. And so why do we do this? Well, it's all tied to the ecosystem not being able to recover from significant harm when we experience a greater than 1 in 10 drought severity. So specifically for MFLs, we are trying to prevent that greater than 2-year recovery. For water reservations, we want to protect fish and wildlife before the harm occurs. And also that is used to legally protect water available for CERT projects in the future. The restricted allocation area focuses on protecting future harm when there is lack of water available to meet projected demands in a region. And I wanted to highlight, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, just some progress that had been made in the Florida Bay. So the area is protected. This is the whole area of protection here in the Florida Bay MFL. This is the green star is the hydrologic monitoring station that looks at the salinity, and we've got some what does it say? USGS sites down here, but really the focus is on this hydrologic station here in Everglades National Park. There is a downstream seagrass indicator that I mentioned below. It's rupia or widgeon grass, and so there needs to be enough or a low enough salinity at this monitoring station to basically not kill off all the seagrass. And so we haven't seen any violations since the inception of this rule. However, there has been a decline in seagrass. It just goes to show it's a complex system. It's not always specifically tied to the amount of water, but this is, what the program has control over. So we don't control all ecological factors, but we do look at specifically volume of water. So why has it declined? Well, there's been a number of factors that have caused this. So we've had a hurricane come through there. There's been increased turbidity. There's been loss of the seed bank. So it's going to take time. There's often lags in these ecosystems that take time to recover. So even though we've lost that seagrass, there's still promise of development. And so now we're actually not seeing that. And what we're looking at right here on the left is this historical range of salinity in the blue, and then the actual salinities that have occurred. As you can see, it becomes too saline and then too fresh, and it's been oscillating around this kind of historical range that provided a more stable ecosystem. And so what we see in the past year is that the salinities have stabilized into their historic range. And we're seeing this recovery of seagrass in a lot of these areas. So Mark Cook does a lot of work in surveying from the helicopter. This picture was actually taken from a helicopter, and you can see some of the seagrass beds thriving in Florida Bay. So there's been progress made in this area, and we're happy to see restoration projects in action and having a positive impact on the ecosystem. And that is my presentation for today, and I'll take any questions.
Okay, thank you, James. Does anyone have questions for James about his presentation? Please raise your hand.
Seeing any.
Okay. Thank you, James. Good job. Next on the agenda, we have Leslie. She's going to give an overview of Everglades restoration projects. Whenever you're ready.
Sure. So good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Leslie Waugh, and I am the section administrator for the Ecosystem Restoration Planning and Project Management section here at the Water Management District. And we are responsible for the planning and implementation of projects like CERT projects, comprehensive Everglades restoration projects under the South Florida Ecosystem Restoration Program. So today I'm going to provide an update just on our comprehensive Everglades restoration plan projects. And we'll go to the next slide. So this slide just provides an overall look at the South Florida Ecosystem Restoration Program structure. So these are projects where the South Florida Water Management District are partners with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And CERT projects are just a portion of the projects in the SFER program. But my presentation today will focus on those CERT projects, mostly within the Lower East Coast Planning region. And there are other projects in the Lower East Coast Planning area, like modified water deliveries in C-111 South Dade. And I won't touch on those today, but if you do have specific questions on those projects, just feel free to reach out to me and I'll see how I can help provide a response. So we'll go to the next slide and we'll get started. And I'll start with projects that are authorized and in design and construction, and we'll work our way north to south. So next slide. So starting up north with the Loxahatchee River Watershed Restoration Project, it's located in the southern Martin County and northern Palm Beach County area with the purpose of improving freshwater flows to the wild and scenic Loxahatchee River and to restore the hydrology and connectivity of wetlands within the watershed. So this project does consist of 3 flowways, and the district has started design of flowways 2 and 3, and we are gearing up to start design of flowway 1 this next fiscal year. And we just want to point out also on these project slides, I do have contact information for each of the project managers. So if you do have specific questions on the project, because I will just be giving a high level overview, you can feel free to reach out to them as well. So for, like I said, for Loxahatchee, we're just starting design. So moving a little south, as the name says, the Broward County Water Preserve Areas, that project is located in Broward County. It's along the US 27 south of Alligator Alley. And the purpose of this project is to manage seepage water and improve the hydrology of water conservation areas 3A and 3B. And the project will also capture runoff from the Western C11 basin, provide groundwater recharge, and improve wetlands. And this project has three main features: the C11 and C9 impoundments and the seepage management areas. Now, the Corps has been designing this project, and we do expect to see an award of a contract for the C11 impoundment this next fiscal year. Okay, next slide. So moving into the Central Everglades, the Central Everglades Planning Project spans from Lake Okeechobee all the way south to Florida Bay. And the purpose of this project is to divert flows that would otherwise be discharged to the northern estuaries from Lake Okeechobee, but we're going to divert those flows to provide restoration flows to the Central Everglades, Everglades National Park, and Florida Bay. And this project consists of 4 phases, and I'll touch on each one of these. But if you would like, it's good timing for this meeting. If you'd like more detailed information on CEP, you can tune in tomorrow. We have a meeting that's joint between the Water Management District and Army Corps on a CEP public informational meeting that's scheduled from 1 to 2:30. So you can find out more details on that meeting on the Corps website, or you can reach out to me if you want to get more information. But we'll continue to the next slide, and I'll just provide a brief update on each phase. So for the CEP Everglades Agricultural Area phase, or the EAA phase, it's located in the Everglades Agricultural Area just south of Lake Okeechobee, and consists of an above ground storage reservoir, a stormwater treatment area, and conveyance improvements to the North New River and Miami canals. And the purpose of these features is to store and treat those restoration flows from Lake Okeechobee, and then to convey that water south to the Everglades water conservation areas, to the Central Everglades. And the Corps and the district are both taking the lead on design and construction of separate features of the EAA, and the STA and the reservoir are currently under construction. Next slide. Okay, so moving south in the CEP project, we have the north phase. So this is located on the boundary between the Everglades Agricultural Area and the water conservation areas, 3A specifically. And the north phase consists of various water control structures and canal improvements to help convey those restoration flows that are stored and treated in the EAA phase. Will convey them to the northwest corner of Water Conservation Area 3A, where more water is needed. So there are a lot of features in this portion of the project. They are listed on the slide, so I won't mention each one of them, but they are under design by the district, and the S620 culvert is under construction at this time. Next. And then next we have the CEP South phase, which is located in Miami-Dade County along Tamiami Trail near Everglades National Park. And this phase consists of, again, various water control structures and levee degrades. And the purpose of this phase is to decompartmentalize and open up the south end of the system to increase flows into Everglades National Park and Northeast Shark River Slough. And the south phase is well underway. The district completed the removal of Old Tamiami Trail and the S33 North Spillway. And the L67 culvert features are under construction under a Corps contract right now. And the Corps is designing and constructing the remaining features. All right. And the final phase in CEP is the new water phase. This phase consists of an approximately 5-mile seepage wall. And the purpose of that wall is to manage seepage from Everglades National Park. So as CERP projects like SEP are completed and implemented, and we have additional water flows into Everglades National Park, the seepage will be managed to help keep that water in the park. And the new water seepage wall is currently under construction by the district, and we expect it to be completed in 2024. Next one. Okay. And moving a little further south in Miami-Dade County, we have the C-111 Spreader Canal Western project. And the purpose of this project is to improve hydrologic conditions in Everglades National Park and improve flows to Taylor Slough and Florida Bay. And this project has been operational and providing ecological benefits since 2012. Next project. And then the final project we have in design and construction in this area is the Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands Project. And this project is located on the southeast coast of Miami-Dade County. The purpose of this project is to divert direct discharges from coastal structures and redistribute that water through the coastal wetlands and improve salinities in the nearshore environment in Biscayne Bay. And we are nearing the finish line on this project. There's 3 components with this project. The Deering Estate component was completed in 2012, and the district started construction of the Cutler Wetlands component this last year. And the Corps is constructing the remaining features of the L31, the East Flowway component. And we expect the entire project to be completed in 2025. Okay, so now we'll switch gears a little bit and move on to our planning projects. Next slide. So again, starting in the north part of the district, we have the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Restoration Project. This project consists of 2 components, which are the Aquifer Storage and Recovery Wells, or ASR wells, and wetland restoration sites. And currently the Corps is preparing a waiver package to update the recommended plan for this project as separable elements and targeting a Water Resource Development Act of 2024 to authorize the wetland restoration portion of the project. And as we continue to do some additional science on the ASR, and the district is continuing the phased implementation of ASR that's informed by the science plan. And we are working with the Corps on some additional scientific studies for ASR. Next, also north of Lake Okeechobee, the district is preparing a feasibility study that's under Section 203 of the Water Resources Development Act to evaluate Component A of SERP. And Component A proposed a 200,000 acre foot above ground storage reservoir to benefit Lake Okeechobee. So this project is called the Lake Okeechobee Component A Reservoir, or LOCAR, and it's meant to capture water during wet times and release it later during dry times and provide benefits to the lake. We expect a draft environmental impact statement that would be out for public review in the October timeframe of this year. And if you would like more information on this project, you can follow along. We have a website, or you can feel free to reach out to the project manager for more information. All right, going back down south to Miami-Dade, we have the Biscayne Bay Southeastern Everglades Ecosystem Restoration Project, or BBCER. And the purpose of this project is to restore salinity regimes in the bay, improve freshwater wetlands, and sea level change resiliency. And the project delivery team on this project, they are nearing completion of the plan formulation and an evaluation process, but there is still time to be engaged in this project, and you can reach out to the project manager or the website for more information. And we do expect a draft project implementation report and environmental impact statement in the mid-2024 timeframe. And then a little out west, we have the Western Everglades Restoration Project, or WERP. And the purpose of this project is wetland restoration, improvements to freshwater flow across the landscape, and reduce wildfires in the Western Everglades. And the team is currently working on refining the tentatively selected plan. And another good opportunity to find out more information about this project, we do have a project delivery team meeting scheduled for next Thursday, August 31st, from 1 to 4. It's in person, but will also be online as well. So if you'd like more information about that meeting, feel free to reach out. And lastly, on the planning side, the Corps and the district recently kicked off an operational planning effort for the first increment of SEP. So currently in the south end of the system, around Tamiami Trail, and the south end of Water Conservation Area 3A, the current water control plan is COP, or the Combined Operational Plan. But as we implement SEP, we want to take advantage of the infrastructure and update that water control plan incrementally so that the ecosystem can benefit from those structures. So this planning effort is just getting started. We expect to have an updated plan approved by March 2026. Again, opportunity to participate. If you would like to in this process, you can reach out through the email that's provided on the slide. Next slide. And then one last plug for upcoming opportunities for public involvement. The draft update for the 2023 integrated delivery schedule, which is our roadmap for CERP projects. We update the schedule every year, but we do have an upcoming task force meeting on September 6th, where the draft plan will be reviewed in that workshop. So if you'd like more information on the IDS, I posted the website there. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. Does anyone have any questions for Leslie? If you do, please raise your hand. Anybody? Seeing no raised hands? Okay, we can move on to the next presentation then.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Pete, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, good morning. Today I'm going to be talking about our saltwater intrusion mapping update and also modeling associated with that as well. Next slide. So I'm going to be talking about an overview of saltwater intrusion in general, the aquifers that are applied to that, and the well fields associated in those aquifers. I'm going to talk about our monitoring and mapping program that we've been doing since 2009. Then talk about our groundwater modeling effort and schedule, and then answer any questions that you may have. So what are some of the common sources of saltwater intrusion? This is an issue that has been dealt with in South Florida since like late 1940s or so. It's not a new phenomenon at all. We've got lateral intrusion of saltwater from the coast. We've got vertical intrusion of saltwater from below, and that's referred to as upconing, and that's shown on the diagram. Also, surface infiltration of saltwater from estuaries and boat basins and things like that. And then finally, there's something called ancient or relic seawater that's trapped in some of the low permeability aquifers, and that can be a source of saltwater intrusion as well. So all of these things are possible sources of saltwater that occur within our aquifers. Thanks. So this is just a slice through the earth of the generalized hydrogeology of South Florida. Over on the west, we have the Fort Myers area and Naples and so forth, and they have multiple aquifers over there. On the lower East Coast, things are a little bit more straightforward. In the superficial aquifer system, it's mostly the Biscayne aquifer, and then other components of the superficial aquifer system. And it's typically about 300 feet along the coast, and it thins as you go west until you get to the Everglades system. Next. So why is this important? Well, on the diagram on the right, we have the locations of public supply well fields, and as an example, in Broward County, these well fields are a major water supply source. Groundwater is the major water supply source in the Lower East Coast, probably 95%. And this is important because these well fields exist and they provide water supply to upwards of 7 million people in the Lower East Coast. And we want to protect that investment and protect the resource. So that's why it's important. And once saltwater enters wells, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to reverse that. And so once it happens, those production wells are no longer available and utilities would need to find a new source of water. It's very expensive to relocate well fields. There's a lot, it's not just the wells. There's a lot of associated infrastructure. There's the pipelines, the treatment plants, and the treatment processes associated with that. So we really need to do everything we can to manage groundwater resources to prevent saltwater intrusion so that those existing well fields, especially to the east, can be protected and they can continue to do what they've been doing for decades, which is provide public water supply. There are other sources of water, but they are more expensive. And it's, for example, the Florida Aquifer is an alternative water supply source, and that water has to be treated with reverse osmosis. It's more expensive than the traditional treatment processes, but it's certainly an alternative water supply source that some utilities have tapped into, and probably more will do so in the future. Next. So on the right is a diagram. The yellow line is the position of the saltwater interface in Palm Beach County. And there are a number of things that affect the position of the interface. One is the Central and South Florida system. We have surface water control structures, and they maintain canal stages that prevent inland movement of salt water. But they also, by maintaining those canal stages, they also maintain groundwater levels, and that also minimizes the inland movement of salt water into the aquifer. So that's one thing that affects the position of the interface. The next is the public water supply well fields. I mentioned those in the previous slide. And so the well locations, the well depths, the pumping rates of those wells, the proximity of those wells to the saltwater source, and the proximity of those wells to canals, which provide groundwater recharge. All those things are definitely factors that influence the position of the interface. And then, more recently, something that we're going to continue to monitor is the impact of sea level rise and climate change on the groundwater system, and then obviously the potential for inland movement of saltwater as a result of those factors. So in 2009, the hydrogeology unit, we got together and we talked about, what are some of the emerging things that we need to keep track of. And we certainly understood that, sea level rise was becoming an emerging issue that we needed to address. And one of the things we noticed is the U.S. Geological Survey had been contracted to produce saltwater interface maps in various counties, Miami-Dade for sure. And then Broward, I think there was one in 1990, and I think Palm Beach was 1987. So they were kind of one-off type of maps that were conducted. And we at the district sort of understood that this was going to be an emerging issue that we weren't going to be able to hide from anymore. And we needed to basically have a more comprehensive mapping effort so that we could actually track the position of the interface over time. And then, with that, identify areas that perhaps we need to do additional monitoring. And then maybe there might have been some operational changes that utilities need to do to address that issue. So that was the impetus for this mapping exercise. We decided that we would do these maps every 5 years. It was based on all the available data that was available to us. And that included wells operated by the USGS, the district, the counties, and then finally water use permittees. And what we do is we map the furthest inland extent of the interface, focusing at the end of the dry season. We use the chloride value, and in that case, it's the 250 milligrams per liter chloride value, and that corresponds with the primary drinking water standard. we recognize that not all permittees are submitting data on a monthly basis. Some of them are required from their permits to submit quarterly or annually. What we tried to do is tap into as many wells as we could. And so we tried to focus on developing the maps at the end of the dry season. So the data from March, April, or May of any particular year is the data that we use. And we focus on our coastal aquifers, the shallow coastal aquifers. In the Lower East Coast case, it's the water table of the Biscayne Aquifer. And then on the West Coast, it's the lower Tamiami sandstone and mid Hawthorne aquifers as well. So here's a map that shows the coastal counties, and on the left is the different aquifers that were mapped in 2009, 2014, and 2019, and sometimes we group them together. I do want to point out that the red counties that we do the mapping for, the one that's missing is Miami-Dade County, but they have a separate contract, and the USGS maps the interface for them, and we certainly didn't want to conflict with anything that the USGS was doing. So that's not part of our mapping program because that's done independently by the USGS. But that's just a map that shows the coastal aquifers and the coastal counties that we generate the maps for. Thanks. So what are some of the mapping challenges? Well, it's really a three-dimensional feature and you're trying to represent it on a two-dimensional map. On the right-hand side of the diagram is a cross-section that shows the saltwater intrusion phenomenon. On the right, you see the saltwater source along the coast. And on the left, you see wells and you see fresh water that's being discharged along the coast. And there's a transition zone that occurs between the mixing between the saltwater and freshwater. And it's a zone, and it exists. And we are trying to represent it with a single line. So that's obviously a simplification of what's going on in the aquifer, but it's convenient for mapping purposes. And as I mentioned in several slides back, there are multiple sources of saltwater that, constitute saltwater intrusion within the aquifer. And that's a challenge, but it's certainly something that, we can address, and we have a certainly an understanding of that issue when it comes to drawing the line. Another issue is there's a lot of development that goes on, and some of the wells that existed in 2009 and 2014 were not available in 2019, and that has continued on into 2023, and it will continue onward. Some of the wells have been abandoned, some have been destroyed because of development, and then some were just no longer monitored. For an example, just to give you an example, we had a well over in Naples area that we were collecting water level and water quality data for 30 years. Well, that was installed in the right of way of an old 2-lane country road, and that became a 6-lane highway. And those wells had to be destroyed. And the good news is that we were able to find some funds, and we installed some replacement wells further away from the right of way so that any future road expansions wouldn't be impacted by that. So that's just an example of some of the challenges that we have in terms of mapping, that the wells are can vary from each 5-year window that we do. And then finally, new wells come along that didn't exist, and that is an improvement, but it sometimes alters our interpretation of the interface. And it's for the better, but it sometimes gives you the impression that the interface might have moved compared to from 2014 to 2019, and it really isn't the case. It's just that with a new well, we're able to better define the location of the interface, and that will certainly be helpful in the future. But it might give you the false sense that the interface moved in that 5-year window, and most likely it probably hasn't. It's just that we were able to better define the interface position. And then finally, mapping challenges. Monitor wells are installed with various depths, with various construction techniques, and then the spacing between wells. And that's all variable. And again, trying to represent that 3D feature with a 2D surface, the well depths are another factor, and it requires interpretation from the hydrogeologist to best represent that interface location. So as an example, on the right is a map that we did in 2019 for Palm Beach County. It is the red line. In general, the interface is close to the coast. Some of the older well fields close to the coast are more vulnerable to saltwater intrusion for obvious reasons because they're closer to the saltwater source. And those are certainly ongoing areas of concern that we have monitor wells in to check what's going on there. One of the benefits of the Lake Worth Drainage District in southern Palm Beach County is that they maintain surface water control elevations as part of their water use permit. And that helps to maintain canal elevations and therefore groundwater elevations. And that tends to fend off saltwater intrusion. The limitation of that is their area is probably by Congress Avenue to the east. I think that's the E4 canal. So it doesn't extend all the way to the coast, and that would be ideal. But the fact that there is a maintained groundwater elevations within their drainage district, that definitely helps fend off saltwater intrusion. Another thing is that there are some wells, those are the gray areas on the map. Those are well fields. And for example, Palm Beach County Water Utilities Department, they don't have much in the way of well fields along the coast. Most of their well fields are inland. And because of that, they are at much less risk of saltwater intrusion. And then finally, I mentioned earlier, some utilities like Jupiter, Lake Worth Beach, et cetera, they have Florida and aquifer well fields. And by having that, they can reduce the water demands on their coastal well fields. And that extends the life of their coastal well fields probably beyond what would normally happen if that was their single source of water. So that's just an example of diversifying resources with their coastal well fields allows them to meet their water demands, and it extends the life of the coastal well field that's probably more at risk of saltwater intrusion. So now I want to talk about a couple of real world examples. And this one is actually a good news story. And in the case of Lantana, Lake Worth area, Lantana, I think, installed some replacement production wells further to the west. Lake Worth Beach did this as well. And also, as I mentioned earlier, Lake Worth Beach installed a Florida well field about 10 years ago or something like that. And what you can see here is the black dotted line is the interface position in 2009. And then the green and red lines in the center graphic is showing the position of the interface in 2014 and 2019. And what you can see in that area is that the interface actually retreated toward the coast. That is a great occurrence. Unfortunately, it's more of an exception than the rule because I haven't seen much of that elsewhere within the lower East Coast. But what you can see here is that by installing wells further to the west and installing Florida and aquifer well fields, reducing the coastal water supply demands, that has resulted in the interface retreating, moving toward the coast, and that's a really good thing. And we can see that in well PB 1717 on the left, where you can see in the red dots indicate that the chloride levels are greater than 1,000. And then in 2009, they started dropping down. That's roughly associated with the installation of these Western wells. And then you can see in 2014 and 2019, the chloride concentrations dropped to levels of about 100 or so, something like that in that well. So that's not only are you seeing the interface position move eastward from the map view, but you can see it on the chloride versus time graph for well 1717 to the right. So that's the good news story. And then a little bit further north, there's well 1723. And that one was showing chloride concentrations increasing historically. But then in the last sample that we took in 2019, it looks like it kind of leveled off. So that's an example of where intrusion was occurring. And that's close to where the interface map is not, it didn't retreat to the coast very much. It kind of stabilized. And so in a very small area, you can see the interface retreating, and then you can also see that the interface position in that location has stabilized. So that's the Lantana Lake Worth Beach good news story. Next. And now this is not as good news. This is in the Hallandale Beach area, and I just picked the 2009 to 2014 as an example. On the left-hand side is the chloride concentration versus time for well 2478. It's down to a depth of about 200 feet. And you can see in the 80s and 90s and even early 2000s, the chloride concentration was probably 100, 200, something like that. It was very stable. Then it started creeping up in the 2002, 2003 timeframe. It went to about 1,000. And then in 2012 or so, it really shot up. And what you can see in the well is you can see the interface actually pass through that particular well and went by it. And on the right-hand side, you could see the interface diagram where the blue line is the interface position in 2009, and then the red is in 2014. And you can see that the interface has moved inland, which is not good, and it has really passed by some of the actual production wells from Hallandale Beach, and they are no longer using some of those, and they are relying on other wells and other water sources. So that's an example where the interface actually within the monitoring time frame that we have, we can see that the interface actually moved past some of the monitor wells and the production wells and has moved inland. Next, please. And then the last example is USGS well 2896. On the right-hand diagram, you can see that the chloride values were kind of variable between 500 and 1,000 for over 10 years. And then we started seeing chloride values pick up and reach upwards of 4,000 or so. That's the well 2896. And on the left-hand side, you can see the diagram of the black line is the 2009 interface estimated position. The green dotted line is 2014, and then the red is 2019. So you could see that based on the data that we did have, we interpreted that the interface is moving inland. And I want to point out to you that west of that area, all the way to the gray area by the turnpike, that's Pompano Beach's western well field. And unfortunately, there are no monitor wells from that general area all the way to 2896. It's a big data gap. And I'll just want to point out briefly, the blue star on the diagram is showing a location near I-95 where I'm going to be talking about a new well that we installed to try to get a handle on, knowing that there's a big data gap there. We wanted to get a handle on, you know, where is the interface position compared to what we had mapped in 2019 to make sure that it wasn't moving rapidly toward Pompano Beach's western well field. Next. So over the last couple of years, again, we noted that there were some areas that we had some concerns about, and we had some data gaps. And through some outstanding project management, if I do say so myself, on some other projects, we identified some funds that we could use to install some monitor wells to fill some of these data gaps. Unfortunately, I don't have a line item in the budget to install some of these saltwater intrusion monitor wells, but these are areas that we were concerned about as Pompano Beach and then in Hollywood. And we wanted to put some new wells in to see if we can fill some data gaps and figure out what's going on, basically. So I'll start with the one in Hollywood. It's near the C10A spur canal. It's a new monitor well. It was installed at the end of 2021, which is referred to as BS2. It's about a little over 200 feet deep, and the well diagram is off to the right. And on the left, you can see that it's near that canal spur. It's associated, or it's close to the Emerald Hills Golf Club. And one of the things I want to point out, I was talking about wells that are abandoned or destroyed. One of the things that we try to look for is locations that the Water Management District has access to. So this well location is actually within one of our right-of-ways. And so for long-term monitoring purposes, we wanted to install this well in a location that we knew we would have access to for the long term. We're not worried about the well being destroyed or abandoned or anything like that. So for any of the new wells, we try to target areas where it's within our right of way so that we know that's going to be a long-term monitoring station and that we can rely on that for the future. And the good news is that the chloride value that was obtained from this particular well, it was a little over 200, and it matched up very nicely with the location of the interface in the Hollywood area. It's west of the mapped interface position, which again is 250 milligrams per liter chlorides. And again, this value of 203 matches up very nicely with the map position of the interface in 2019. And we look forward to using this station for long-term monitoring, as I said. So the second well that we installed is, again, along right away of near I-95. That's Atlantic Boulevard, and it's the red dot there. That's part of our right of way. There's a small canal there. And again, that's going to be a long-term monitoring station. In the middle is just a picture of the wellhead. You can see it's a flush mount construction, so it's very unobtrusive. And again, if there's any mowing of any kind that needs to be done along the right of way there, that can happen without causing any problems with the well. On the diagram to the right, you can see the well is completed down to about 300 feet deep. We took a water sample from that earlier this year in April. And the good news is in that the red dot location on the left, we had a concern that we had no monitor wells between the interface position and Pompano's western well field. The good news is that even at a depth of 300 feet, the chloride value was 24, so it's very fresh. So it looks like the interface has not moved all the way to that location. And I think that really bodes well for Pompano's western well field, is that there's a lot of buffer between the mapped interface position and the chloride value in this well. And that's a really good observation that we had there. So what can we do to deal with this saltwater intrusion issue? As I said, this is something that's been going on since the 40s and the 50s. Well, water conservation, I think, is first and foremost all the time. Reducing pumpage in the coastal well fields will extend the life of those coastal well fields. Prioritizing withdrawals from the western well fields. And what that does is that, again, extends the life of the coastal well fields. And that can continue to happen as long as it doesn't cause adverse impacts to natural systems like wetlands and things like that. And that's all handled through our water use permitting process. Other thing we can do is increase groundwater recharge from canals, reclaimed water, et cetera. And that maintains and improves freshwater heads, and that counteracts the ability of saltwater to move inland. Talked about this earlier, using alternative water supplies. There's the Florida aquifer. There's reuse for irrigation purposes. There's surface water storage, such as the C51 phase 1 reservoir. And all of those things are alternative water supplies, and they reduce our reliance on our coastal well fields. Next, just constructing water supply and water resource development projects, including SERP. That obviously is a good thing to extend water resources in general. Next is maintaining, enhancing, and conducting monitoring of our saltwater intrusion monitoring network. I refer to it as a network, but it's really an ad hoc group of monitor wells that are sampled by many entities, including the district. And we rely on those monitor wells to allow us to do the saltwater interface mapping. And that allows us to figure out what's going on with saltwater intrusion and identify areas of concern. And then the last thing is managing the resource. And that's conducting density-dependent groundwater modeling to simulate potential saltwater intrusion as a result of things such as current and future pumping. And then, as was talked about earlier, sea level rise and climate change. So the last portion of the presentation was focused on the saltwater intrusion mapping program. The next thing I want to talk about is the development of our East Coast surficial model. This is our flagship groundwater modeling effort. It's covering the Upper East Coast and the Lower East Coast planning regions. We're able to evaluate, the objective of this modeling exercise is to evaluate if water supply demands within the East Coast planning regions can be met within that 20-year planning horizon without undue effects on existing legal users or causing saltwater intrusion and impacts on natural systems. We do this by simulating and evaluating effects of sea level rise and climate change on the aquifer system as part of the district's water supply vulnerability assessment. That is above and beyond what we do for the water supply plans. And that's a new effort that we're doing to look at something much longer term than the 20-year planning horizon. And we're going to be using this tool to go ahead and do that. So this is a very large undertaking. There is a USGS computer code called CWAT, and that allows for that variable density groundwater flow to be simulated. We recognized early on that the version of CWAT that the USGS had developed was a very powerful tool, but there were some unique features to the South Florida hydrologic system that we wanted to incorporate with CWAT, but that the USGS computer code that was available isn't able to accomplish that. So what we did was we took the CWAT 2000 version of developed by the USGS and we modified it to incorporate some of the unique hydrologic features. And I'll spill the beans and say the biggest one is wetland systems. The CWAT 2000 and ModFlow 6 in general doesn't have a package that allows us to explicitly simulate wetlands. You use something called the drain package, and it really doesn't do as good a job of simulating wetland systems. But remember, we have the water conservation areas in Everglades National Park. That is a large portion of the Lower East Coast footprint. And we wanted to have the capability of simulating those wetland features in the best way possible. So our team of groundwater technology folks, data analysts, and programmers went ahead and took the CWAT 2000 code, modified it, and we developed something called CWAT 2022, which is the computer code that is the basis of the East Coast Surficial model. It's, again, a density-dependent groundwater model now that is being developed. It's being peer-reviewed. And again, as I said earlier, it's covering the lower and upper East Coast planning regions. And that is the tool that we are going to use to really simulate current and future effects of sea level rise and climate change on the aquifer system, focusing on evaluating saltwater intrusion. So I want to just cover some basic elements of the East Coast Surficial model. Again, I mentioned that it is based on the CWAT computer code. Our calibration period is 1985 to 2012. Our verification period, which is what we use to make sure that we can simulate a period of record outside of the calibration period, and that's from 2013 to 2016. We have daily stress periods. The cell size of the model domain is 1,000 foot by 1,000 foot. We have 5 model layers that constitute the surficial aquifer system. And we're calibrating not only to water levels, but also to water quality. In particular, that means total dissolved solids of the aquifer system. And that's where variable density groundwater is coming from. And then the boundaries are on the north side is Indian River County. On the south side is in the Keys. On the west side, as you can see, it's like the L1, 2, 3 canals and so forth. And then finally on the east side is the Atlantic Ocean or intracoastal. And that's the footprint of them all. So I mentioned that we have 5 layers that constitute the surficial aquifer system. Just want to call your attention that on the right is the hydrostratigraphy. So it's mostly the water table aquifer, and the layers probably 2 and 3 are the predominant layers that constitute the Biscayne aquifer, and that's the major supply source in Lower East Coast. But it also captures elements of the gray limestone aquifer, which is not as permeable, and then there are some less permeable units within the overall hydrostratigraphic framework that are also included. But those are the 5 layers that the model is trying to simulate. So with a model, a footprint of this size, there are literally thousands of what we call calibration targets. And these are wetland gauges, monitor wells, surface water stations, and then monitor wells with respect to water quality that we are calibrating to. And, you know, this is a very large undertaking. It's been going on for a couple of years now. And it's truly a monumental effort, but we knew that we wanted to achieve calibration with all these calibration targets And it's all geared toward, as the better we can do from a model calibration perspective, the better that the predictions that are generated from the model, that we have confidence in those results. And that's why we're doing really a yeoman's effort in terms of calibration of this large footprint of a model domain to try to again be at the point where when we finally get to the predictive scenarios that we're going to run, that we have great confidence that the model is pointing out areas of concern and then allows utilities and others to best manage the resources that they do have. So again, this has been going on for a while now. We are in the midst of calibration. In fact, next week we have a check-in with our peer review panel. We've got independent groundwater modeling experts that have been involved with us through the process of developing the model, how we're approaching calibration, the calibration targets that we're focused on. And that's what's happening in calendar year 2023. And we're hoping, fingers crossed, that we'll have a draft of the calibration by the end of the calendar year. And then in 2024, we expect that we will complete the calibration, address any final comments from the peer review panel, and then we'll be in a position to conduct the water supply planning application simulations that would support planning efforts for the Lower East Coast and eventually the Upper East Coast. And then in the end of the dry season in 2024, we're going to be conducting chloride and other water quality sampling at the monitor wells that we have access to. And while I'm here, I want to put a plug out that, we have, the maps that we've generated in the past were based, as I said earlier, on wells that are sampled by the USGS, the Water Management District, counties, utilities, and other permittees. But we know that there are monitor wells out there that are not within our purview. And so whenever I have an opportunity to make this presentation, I'm putting that request out there, is that if you all have, and I'm focused mostly on governmental entities, but if you all have monitor wells that the data is not typically submitted to the Water Management District as a result of, as a condition of your water use permit, and those wells exist, we would love to have access to those so that we can collect a water quality sample, and that becomes a new dot on the map that allows us to generate a better interpretation of the saltwater interface. So, and I'll be making that pitch at many and whatever opportunity that I can between now and the end of the next dry season, in order to improve the ability of the map to be as accurate as possible. So with that, once all that data is collected and compiled, we anticipate that we'll be generating the 5-year update to the maps. And in the fall of next year, we would have maps for all of our coastal aquifers, and that would be the 2024 version of the maps. And then we can, again, interpret that and identify any areas of concern, and then perhaps use that to identify locations where we may want to install additional wells, or it may point to utilities perhaps modifying their operational schemes to prevent saltwater intrusion from threatening their well fields. And then finally, as I said earlier, as part of our overall resiliency program, we'll be doing some model runs to support the water supply vulnerability assessment. Again, that is beyond the 20-year planning horizons of the water supply plans. That's probably looking in the 50-year window, and we'll be doing some simulations probably in late 2024, early 2025 to support that effort. And this is a slide that shows links to, if anyone wants to look at the maps from 2009, 2014, and 2019, the data is all available there. The actual raw data is available in the other links that are listed, and then my contact information. And so if you all have access, again, to monitor wells that are not part of these maps, that we can on these maps at the bottom, you can see every well that we used. You may want to scan that. And if you actually have wells that are not on those maps and you would like to make them available to us, that would be great. Please contact me and we can talk about the logistics of making sure that folks get out there to collect a water quality sample at the end of next dry season to support the development of the 2024 maps. And that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Great, thank you, Pete. That was a lot of information. So anybody have any questions for Pete? Please raise your hand.
We have a couple hands raised already. Bob Hartman. Go ahead, Bob.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hi, this is Council Member Bob Hartman from Southwest Ranches, and thank you very much for the presentation and for taking my question. I want to raise a concern. When you were going through the various well fields in Broward County during your saltwater intrusion discussion, I happen to notice that Southwest Ranches, there's no identification of a well field here. Southwest Ranches is on the south side of C11 from US 27 to Flamingo Road and south to Sheridan Street. So we're roughly 13 square miles. Now, what differentiates us from the rest of the county, and also in my mind, I want to make sure we get on the map somehow, is 95% of our town are on wells. We're unique in Broward County. Now, a few of our areas to the north along Griffin Road Canal, or as we call it, or C11, has Vista View, formerly a large garbage dump that was declared a Superfund site in the 70s. And there are actually county monitoring wells there because years ago, we started having livestock dying of unusual cancer clusters. We had residents, so essentially some limited areas in there either get their water from Sunrise Municipal Water Supply or Cooper City. Now, the rest of the town is entirely dependent on well fields. And in my mind, when you're measuring the various, and I don't mean necessarily saltwater intrusion, that's probably the least, but there's all sorts of other contaminants around us. And I'm not sure why we're not on the map, but I'd hate to see us overlooked because of a lack of recognition that we are essentially a 13 square mile well field. Thank you. Thank you for taking my question.
This is Pete Kwiatkowski. Thank you, Councilman. And I will certainly make sure that the map is updated in the future, and you can be sure that the withdrawals that are coming from your well field are incorporated into our overall analysis when we get to doing any kind of updates to the maps. But thank you.
Yeah, the details on our well field would be easily obtainable by Broward County since all of our wells are permitted.
Understood. Thank you.
All right, next up, Randy Brown. All right, Randy. Randy, you're coming in very muffled. Actually, beyond muffled.
Maybe he can put his comment in the chat. No.
Okay, do you want to try again, Randy? All right, let's go ahead and
Better?
there you go.
There you are.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the presentations. Something to look forward in the future is with the coming regulations from the EPA about contaminants of emerging concern. In time, as the regulations get tighter and tighter, and we're measuring down into parts per trillion, most lime softening plants aren't going to meet those levels. And there's going to be more of a move towards membrane operations, and that those utilities are going to need to look for water that are, replace that 15% water that'll be in the concentrate rather than what they had used for production out of the lime softening. So that's something to consider in the future.
That's a good point, Randy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Randy. All right, Virginia Walsh. Morning, Virginia.
Good morning. Good morning. Hopefully you guys can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Well, great. Yeah, Virginia Walsh, Miami-Dade Water and Sewer Department. Couple questions. Pete, what is the sampling schedule for those new monitoring wells? And does the district do any of the geophysical downhole logging for those wells?
The sampling schedule for which wells?
The new wells that you had on the screen there?
Oh, well, we took an initial sample from each of the 2 wells in Broward County, and then we intend to take samples at the end of next dry season in the March, April, May timeframe.
Okay, so they're sampled annually then?
No, not necessarily. I mean,
Okay.
they were sampled when they were first installed, and they're going to be sampled as part of this
Okay.
5-year update to the mapping exercise.
Okay. And were any downhole geophysical logs done? Anything like that? Or
Not
just
on those 2 wells, but
Okay.
but we contract with the USGS to do some electromagnetic induction logging on some of the coastal monitor wells.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and I just wanted to say is USGS is in the process of updating the salt front line for us down in Miami-Dade County. So we hope to have that early 2024. I think they're on target to have an updated line done for that. And also, you know, is we're doing our own in-house looking at working with our groundwater flow model, and Angela Montoya is in the process of doing upgrading that to do take into account variable density as well. So it's going to be very interesting next year because we'll have 3 different interpretations of the salt front line down here in Miami-Dade County. So they all correspond to one another, I hope.
I'm sure they're going to line up.
I hope so. Thank you, guys. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Virginia, how often does the USGS do the saltwater interface mapping in Miami-Dade?
Well, it's a formal mapping is usually every 5 years, 5-6 years, a formal published map. Because we use our you know, for the construction building permits and all that stuff, they refer to that published USGS map for some of the, you know, groundwater elevations and stuff that they need for permitting stuff. But in reality is we, as you know, we constantly monitor the salt front down here. So we usually get an update from the USGS folks on a quarterly basis of any changes that we see in any of the wells or any movement in the salt front informally through meetings on a quarterly basis. So, but a formal published USGS published salt front line that goes through their whole, you know, internal peer review process, et cetera, we usually do every 5 years, and they're in the process of doing that now.
Great, thank you. All right, I see Councilman Hartman, your hand is raised. Do you have another comment? Councilman Hartman, we can't hear you if you're speaking. All right. Not hearing you, I think we'll go ahead and move on. And oh wait.
I'm sorry, I stepped away just for a second. Did you have a question for me? Because you answered my earlier question.
Okay, your hand was still raised, so no,
I'm sorry.
no, sir.
Sorry about
Nope.
that.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, that's all the hands raised.
Okay, great. Thank you for those comments. Those are helpful. Next on the agenda, we have Carolina. And she's going to tell us about the district's resiliency program.
Thank you, Tom. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Happy to be here today. Thanks for the invitation, water supply team, and really great to be working alongside with you and bringing some of the resiliency updates also as part of this discussion. For all of you that have been spending the morning, a big portion of your morning so far, hanging there, we have just a few more presentations, relevant topics coming before the end of this very important session. So stay with us here, and we're going to go through some of additional slides now, focusing on resiliency, and appreciate your attention. So my presentation will focus on three main topics here. So first, we're going to touch understanding our resiliency challenges and opportunities through data and modeling. We are also going to talk a little bit about our efforts to enhance resiliency of water resources in general, and beginning to touch on water supply, and then the vision for the future. So beginning with the is our data effort. We have a program in place. It's called the Water and Climate Resilience Metrics. And here is a picture of, in the left here is a picture of our hub. Basically what we have there is an interface that we bring relevant information on trends that we have been identifying in long-term observations from multiple data sets that we manage as an agency. So we went through the exercise of looking at the whole set of data sets that we have, finding the ones that we have robust data, and really bringing the analysis, the trend analysis done for each of those data sets to a portal, along with some explanations and initial insights that we can provide. This is a program that is like evolving. We have reached an important milestone, which is bringing relevant metrics and automating them. We are closing this phase one in the next 2-3 months. So we prioritize 15 metrics. We went through the whole data sets. We performed all the analysis. We validated those analyses with a common approach, statistical approach, Menkendo, to validate the trends. And we are publishing all of that in this portal, along with data, the data itself, and for the data sets that we have real-time monitoring coming from DB Hydro Insights, DB Hydro data sets. We also have now full link to the database and automated trend analysis. So we basically coded the data analysis integrated into the DB Hydro Insights. So every plot or every trend plot that we see in the site is now linked to the database in DB Hydro Insights, and the user can easily download the data and access the data that was used to perform the trend analysis. So next one, please. I'm going to go through a few of those. As I said, we have 15. Some of them are already automated and published there. And I'm going to use some of the most relevant ones just to illustrate what we have, and of course, in the context of water supply discussions that we are having here today. And the first one is stale water stages. I think we touched this in many of the topics when we were talking about the MFLs, when we were talking about modeling, when we were talking about all those efforts. We are interested in understanding sea level rise impacts, and the way we can read that is through our stale water stages. Those are monitoring gauges that we have in addition to the NOAA tidal stations. I have them plotted on the top right there. Of course, this is data that is long-term data that is monitored by NOAA, but we also have a significant number of data sets, very, I would say, more granular along the coast in all the coastal structures. So right downstream in the tailwater downstream on the coastal structures, we monitor this tidal elevations for very long periods of times as well. You can see in this plot from 1982 all the way to 2022. We also have 2023, just the trend line is stopping there. But anyway, again, real-time data, more granular than what we have from NOAA in all those coastal stations. And if you click on the map there in the hub, you're going to see exactly where we have the data, where we have those plots, and where it's available. And again, linking you straight to the DB Hydro where you can download the data. Next one, please. This is another set, rainfall data. What we have here is not fully automated analysis. Rainfall is a big, I would say, a big animal here. We have many different ways of looking at that. And we made a decision to look at that more regionally and not station by station. There is significant noise on a station by station analysis, and a very, I would say we will need way more time to be able to digest and find any kind of clear conclusion out of this data set. That's our first perspective after looking at the station by station data sets. So what we did is we performed the analysis on a more regional basis, and we did it for year, the whole year, annual averages, and we also did for wet season. All of those analyses pointed to some trends, but not a lot of significant trends. So we are being very careful here on what we see, how we evaluate the data, and we have very little significant trends. This plot here illustrates one area where we don't have a significant trend. You can see the yellow and the orange line there showing the 97.5, 20.5 tail ends there, really kind of helping us to see that we don't have a really significant trend there, but you can see a slightly upward trend on wet season total rainfall for the specific region. Again, all the stations in Broward. This is our rainfall region, so that's how we compile the data. And again, you can go there and see the analysis done by all the regions, where we have trends, where we don't have trends. And again, you don't have real-time data in this case, but you can also access the data that was used to perform this analysis. Two more things we're doing is looking at subdaily now and also extremes. So leaving a little bit from the average analysis, but looking from the extremes, both from the wet extremes and dry extremes, what we have. And also on the subdaily scale, we are also seeing some of those trends beginning to show up. We're going to publish additional analysis as we get to conclusions and, of course, peer review of all this information. Next one, please. Another data set that we have is evapotranspiration. So those are, we have two main pen evaporations that we monitor, pen stations that we monitor evaporation, and also data from the USGS that helps us on the evapotranspiration. What we have plotted here are the data from those three data sets. We have, as you can see, significant trends there. And we are looking at so upward trends on total evaporation, and we are looking and validating some of those further refined analysis with the USGS, and going deep to the level of really even measuring the plant portion, stamina, and all of those things that really impact the total calculation and total trends observed in ET. There is much more to come, but this is the initial plot of the data that we have, and also available on the portal there for you to download. Next one, please. This additional data sets here, we are plotting actually two at the same time because there is some importance of accounting for looking at those two data sets together. So you saw Pete presenting significant updates on the saltwater mapping, saltwater interface mapping. So what we have here is basically the same data set that he uses for his analysis. The whole data set, mostly coming from regulation and some other data sets that we have. And in this case, we do have real time. So anytime that this is fully incorporated into DB Hydro, this is already plotted here. So we have both chloride levels, again, from the monitoring wells that Pete was just describing in most of the cases. And we also have groundwater levels. This is the blue line showing in this picture. So it's important that we monitor the chloride levels along with the groundwater levels. So for all the locations that we identify, again, they are all plotted in the map there as well. You can find where we have data available. We are plotting chloride along with groundwater levels. And in this case here, it's a well in North Miami. You can see here the time when the chlorides passed the 1,000 milligrams per liter mark, plotted in red. There is a significant upward trend there. In, I would say, most of the locations where we have well fields close to the coast, we are seeing this trend, not all of them. And also we have here groundwater levels that are being plotted there, and we are seeing in average some of the downward trends here that can help explain some of those concentrations that we are reading as well. Next one, please. Moving from observations to projections, we do have also some projections data in our portal. In this case, the sea level rise projections is not something that we are plotting. We are just linking to data sets that are multiple data sets. In this case, the most recent NOAA NASA, it's a partnership for the 2022 sea level rise curves. So here's just a plot of that source there. Is the most recent projections in terms of sea level rise, showing the intermediate low, intermediate high, and the extrapolations there. And also we have, and the extrapolations, which is the orange line in this plot. Next one, please. We have been working also intensively on estimating future rainfall. So this is a partnership, a long-term partnership between the USGS and FIU, expanded now to the entire South Florida Water Management District area. So basically what we are doing now as part of this effort is looking at available global climate modeling downscaling data sets, reviewing really the latest science and refining evaluation for this predicted rainfall. And we as an agency, so South Florida Water Management District, first published estimated change factors for extreme wet rainfall in 2017. And this is the whole work and the definition of the change factor, which is basically a multiplying factor for increasing rainfall for each specific frequency, duration, intensity curve. So we did that using NOAA Atlas 14 data. So we also recommend the application of those change factors on maps and data coming from the NOAA Atlas 14. So we do have now those curves developed for the 16 county areas. It's really supporting our planning capacity, mostly our flood protection level of service program, as we are now incorporating future rainfall intensification as part of future scenarios in those modeling efforts, looking at flood, of course, flood resiliency and flood adaptation needs. This effort is currently being extrapolated to the whole state. This is a partnership between, again with the USGS, FIU, South Florida, other water management districts, and led, carried by the Florida Flood Hub at the USF. So Dr. Fraser is the director of the center. We are working very closely with them. There is a work group that was formalized, I believe, 6 months ago. We are going to those meetings, and we have received results from the USGS. So applying the same methodology that was applied for South Florida, extending it statewide, and also including 2040 data. That was the requirement from our statutes. We have not produced the 2040 when we did our analysis, but now we are also bringing the 2040 data. So as soon as this statewide effort is peer review and finalized for publication, we will also bring the 2040 scenarios to our database. Next one, please. And when I talk about the database, that's what we have. It's actually in our portal. We have the results of this initial phase of the study with the USGS, again, so far only for 2040. But for each county and for each rainfall region, again, the multipliers are provided by rainfall region. You can go down by the gauge level, like individual stations. But again, the recommendation is to apply those change factors by a region. And we have calculated them with all the percentiles there, the median and the spread for all those by the county level. So all the stations within the counties and by a rainfall regions level. And we also have those plots there. In this case, what you see here is one basin in the West Coast, just as an example. We have 1 the median pointing to a 12%, so 1.12 means 12% increase for future rainfall. In this case, is for a 1-day, 5-year return period. Next one, please. So all of these data sets and additional analysis that we are doing, in this case, we have one more analysis here that is the difference between tailwater and headwater. So as you know, our system is a gravity-based system, and we operate by gravity. We need the headwater levels to be higher than the tailwater levels so we can discharge to the coast, and it mainly for, of course, flood protection operation, but we also we maintain those headwater levels high for protecting water, our well fields and against saltwater intrusion, of course. What we see here is a plot showing that we have a trend in the number of days where the tailwater is higher than headwater. So we have already detected limitations in our discharge capacity as a result of sea level rise. So we do have reduced discharge capacity in some of those most vulnerable coastal structures. We have a video here. I'm sure most of you have already been exposed to this video. I don't know if we're going to be able to pass, but this is a video showing saltwater moving inland, so overtopping the gate here. So during a high tide event in the 2019 high tide season, we were able to record this. So really, really high waters, higher sea level, saltwater intrusion moving inland, really overtopping the gate, demonstrating the urgency for us in really enhancing, refurbishing those structures, coastal structures, to be able to perform under those already evolving conditions. Next one, please. I'm going to talk more a little bit about that next, but yeah, this here is just you showing the video of saltwater intrusion moving inland. So all of this data, of course, points us to the need for planning for climate change and sea level rise. So we are really committed to determine those best short-term and long-term strategies for water resources management. We are continuing to develop and improve our data analysis, surface groundwater, coastal inland, and really with a focus on saltwater intrusion. Pete presented a summary of our groundwater modeling investments really being designed and implemented to support the evaluation of those sea level rise and climate change scenarios, anticipate this demand and availability impacts, and simulate with much better capacity to understand this future saltwater inland movement. We are here now bringing this capacity first to the lowest coast planning region, beginning with this water supply plan, and of course, hoping to expand to other regions in future water supply planning efforts. And we are also going to be incorporating project recommendations as part of our district resiliency plan. We do have a planning document now with priority projects, adaptation projects that we're going to be investing and looking for funding sources. Next one, please. I'm going to touch briefly on flood resiliency studies. This is, of course, a larger presentation, and this is the very first time I have those two major efforts condensed in one slide. Just to summarize to you all what we are doing, where we are in terms of flood resiliency studies. So on the left, I mentioned about the flood protection level of service program that we have. It's really our strategy for assessing the impacts of land development and change climate conditions on flood control infrastructure. We do model current and future conditions. I touched about the topic of bringing future rainfall intensification as part of future simulations for the program. And this program really is the key to support decision-making on what's the priority and sequencing of infrastructure investments. So when we are thinking about coastal structures, the case that I just illustrated to you, coastal structures, limitations, need for investments in those coastal structures, we really use results from this program to help us prioritize, and of course, beginning of the design of those coastal structures, what is needed, what's the capacity that we're going to have to be restoring at those locations. In parallel to that, we are initiating a partnership with a study with the Army Corps of Engineers. This is the CNSF flood resiliency study. This initial study, you're going to probably hear about it as the 216 study. This is an initial phase looking at the most vulnerable pieces of the CNSF system, most vulnerable components. And as you can expect, after doing the assessments on the entire CNSF system and how we would be focusing this study, the recommendation from the Corps was to focus on those coastal structures. So we have here coastal structures in Miami and Broward. We have one, the northernmost one it touches Palm Beach County too, is G56 there in the Hillsborough Canal. So we're going to be looking at those coastal structures to really improve the overall capacity that we have there, reduce flood risks, increase flood resiliency in this high-risk urban watersheds, continue to really provide protection to those coastal well fields in those locations, and increase our capacity to operate the system as a whole. Next one, please. Now I'm going to move to what I'm calling the most relevant slide for this presentation today. In parallel to doing flood vulnerability assessments, we are really beginning to do water supply vulnerability assessments. This is Pete presented to you all the efforts on advancing the East Coast SUFISHA model and bringing the variable density components there, modules there. This is relevant. This is the first time South Florida Water Management District is bringing that capacity to model sea level rise as part of this effort here, the Lowest Coast Plan. This is really a significant step already in our goal to assess future conditions and implications for water resources in general and mainly water supply. And I really want to just point that at the same time that we are starting to advance this groundwater modeling and really addressing the significant issue, we set a parallel work group internally in the agency to look at two additional needs that we have. So the water supply plans are looking at a 20-25 year horizon, and we understood as a group that it's very important to look at longer term potential impacts as well. So what we are proposing here is this parallel assessment. We would be looking at a 50-year horizon, really outside of the legal framework that is associated with the water supply plans in general. And second, we would also be able to bring the climate change input as part of this assessment. So in addition to sea level rise that is already being incorporated, bringing mainly temperature, rainfall, and evapotranspiration as part of those scenarios in modeling simulations. So this is a large effort. This is a longer term effort. We are really beginning to prepare input data that we will be able to bring to the runs after the Lower East Coast runs are completed. So priority is given to the Lower East Coast sea level rise runs. That's going to be the first effort. But as soon as those runs are completed, we're going to use the same model to be expanded to future years and bring those additional analysis. And here on the right, I have a very brief summary. I need more time to explain. I'm going to just point to some of the main messages here. And I apologize for the very small letters. I'm going to try to guide you there. But basically, what this picture is proposing to say here is that we're going to start by looking at the growth rates. And in most of the cases, we are really going to follow the processes that we have for the water supply plans. So we're going to, as you can see here, using from the terms of growth rates, we're going to be using those the same rates that we use for the water supply plans. For the population itself, we hire Bieber to help us extrapolate the population to a 50-year horizon. So that is a modification from the population used for the water supply plans. But yeah, we have the initial deliverable from Bieber arriving. We are looking at that now. We accept it as a product, and we are going to be doing internal analysis to evaluate that deliverable and adjust the deliverable to the format required for those future simulations. For agricultural, we are again going to be using the same approach for the Lower East Coast plan, both in terms of sorry, the growth rate and the approach that is used for determining the demand rates there. The only modification that we're going to be doing there is we're beginning those conversations also with the FDEX group. So they have a model that they call it AFSIRS, and I can, this is, let me get you to the name. It's Agricultural Field Scale Irrigation Requirements Simulation Model. So as part of this model, they do have some assumptions that we can adjust to incorporate future climate conditions. So not changing any crop, not changing any growth rates at this point. We're going to assume the same ones, but just looking at if we could perhaps understand irrigation rates, mostly based on those scenarios that we're going to be simulating, accounting for ET, rainfall, and temperature changes. For the additional uses there, landscape and domestic self-supply, we're going to just use the same, basically proportionally increase those to the population growth that we're going to be calculating. And for power and institutional, commercial, and industrial uses, we are going to use the various numbers that we have from the 2045 Lower East Coast plan. So moving away from this demand boxes there and going to the top right, those are the climate data sets. So we do have the sea level rise projections and the data sets that are being produced to the Lower East Coast plan. We're going to extrapolate those to 2050. And then we're also going to bring temperature, ET, and rainfall projections. Those we are currently working with the USGS and FIU on a contract to help us determine how we're going to be reading those. We do have already outputs in terms of changing in overall rainfall rates for average conditions, so annual totals, seasonal totals. And we are now going to bring the variation that we need to represent, like the extremes that we need to represent in this historical simulation, and really understanding and determining how we are going to bring those extreme droughts, how we want to make sure that this is being modeled correctly and really brought to the simulations. One thing that we need to say is that we're going to be running, and I'm moving now to the availability boxes there. Basically, we have what we call buckets for all the different water sources. And we're going to be running both the superficial RSM model and the groundwater ECSM models to be able to simulate really the impacts overall in those different water sources here. So it's a more comprehensive assessment. We need to be able to understand in general how those different water buckets are being impacted by that. So it's going to be an interactive process also on really making sure that both the groundwater and the surface water models are really talking, and the boundary conditions, like the information being exchanged between those two models, are aligned. So that's a very quick glance of the strategy here. If you want to get more information, it took us about 1.5 years, but we have a whole approach that is described in detail. This is attached to the resilience plan, the 2023 resilience plan. We sent this out for comments. We got significant comments, 24 agencies that submitted comments to us. We addressed most of those comments, and we're going to be publishing this on September 1st. But the whole approach, the description and the details of the approach is attached to the plan document. It's already available in our website, and the final version will be published again on September 1st. Next one, please. So I touched and I mentioned our resiliency plan document. So this is the 2023 draft, sea level rising for the resiliency plan. Here, just a glance on our vision. So this planning effort really is focusing on reducing risks and utilizing implementation resources that we have to be able to continue to perform our mission successfully, water supply, flood control, and ecosystem restoration. We have, of course, anticipated future conditions. That's the angle that we see resiliency. So looking at what we need to do today and continue to do in the future under those evolving conditions. We focus a lot on also protecting critical infrastructure, disadvantaged communities that are impacted by that. So we do have also sessions really explaining how we are looking at that, how we are looking at protecting those critical assets and populations in general. We have a commitment to public engagement and leveraging partnerships. I mentioned the extensive review comments that we receive. This is the third iteration of this plan, and we receive more than 20 comments every year. We see that as a way that we are evolving the plan itself and also really coordinating and engaging with significant partners. Most of the projects that we are delineating and bringing to this plan really depend on close coordination with partners at different levels. So we are hoping that we can achieve that by this very engaged process. So of course, we have our ongoing ecosystem restoration efforts in parallel, SERP and other restoration efforts. They're going to continue to advance that also provide significant resiliency overall to our mission, to our goal, to water management and the environment in general. And we are also bringing innovative green nature-based solutions as part of the projects that we are being proposing now at this plan. As we understand, this is a big part of finding the best solutions and really attending the needs from those communities. Next one, please. So I mentioned two of the assessments, and I touched on the flood protection level of service program. Those are modeling tools that we use to fully assess those conditions today and into the future, and that support design and identification of those adaptation strategies. I mentioned the water supply vulnerability assessment that will be initiated as soon as we complete the lowest cost runs. That will also help us delineate strategies, adaptation strategies. And all of those assessments are really bringing those project recommendations to our plan, to this document that we are calling our Sea Level Rise and Flood Resiliency Plan. So the main goal of this effort is to reduce the risks of flooding, sea level rise, and other climate impacts on water resources in general, and increasing community and ecosystem resiliency in South Florida. And as I mentioned, the final publication of the 2023 plan will happen on September 1st. Next one, please. I also touched on SERP, and I really love this slide here. I think it really reinforces that ecosystem restorations, those significant efforts that we have been implementing as an agency for around 20 years now, support mitigation against sea level rise and other impacts from a changing climate. And really the goals for SERP and all the ecosystem restoration efforts are aligned with adaptation strategies that are needed to build resiliency in South Florida. Next one, please. In my final slide here is really reinforcing again this understanding that coordination is essential. All those resiliency initiatives that we are beginning to delineate, that we are beginning to prioritize, the projects that we are beginning to have funds are really being designed and coordinated with multiple levels, at multiple levels. We really look at the county projects, we coordinate with the counties. When we do those level of service assessments, for instance, we just completed one for the C8, C9 basins in the border of Miami and Broward there. We had more than 40 meetings, workshops with the counties, understanding what kind of projects they are proposing, counties in 298 districts. So what are the projects they are proposing for the basin overall, how they are aligned with the strategies that we are proposing, and really recommending a final implementation strategy that align those projects, that sequence those projects in a way that we're going to achieve like overall basin-wide benefits. We also look at local municipality projects, utilities, 298 districts, as I mentioned, the Army Corps coordination. We are now initiating the 216 study. There is a lot of other efforts, especially on ecosystem restoration, but of course, bringing those new resiliency studies now, initiating those and really focusing also on those additional components that we need to bring to the CNSF system and overall resiliency in South Florida. We work very closely with regional climate compacts. The Southeast Florida Regional Climate Compact is of course the pioneer on all of those initiatives, and we are working very closely with additional ones that we have within the 16 county area. In other partners in general, we see more and more significant partners joining us, planning councils, TNC, other organizations that are Everglades Foundation, a series of organizations that we are coordinating very closely, understanding how they're seeing those resiliency priorities, and really understanding that there are many different solutions here. And this picture on the bottom here just illustrate from a coastal inland perspective here that we can be looking at beach dune restoration, living shorelines, shoreline stabilization, levees, flood walls, canal enhancements, our coastal structure enhancements, drainage improvements in general. The reservoir in the core of all of this, when I think I joke that when we talk about resiliency, it's almost like a synonym for storage. That's a big piece that we need to bring. We have very limited capacity in storing water in Florida, but that's a key solution to many of our evolving problems and evolving issues that we're going to have in the future, is really enhancing our capacity to store more water. Stormwater treatment areas, again, reinforcing the need of nature-based solutions, and really the water quality goals that we have associated with all of that. And local strategies. I mean, along with all of us looking to move water away, to reduce flood risks, there is also this living with the water strategies, where we are relocating, finding places that are really needed to relocate, elevate, and flood proof. So a series of strategies that needs to be aligned and at least accounting for each other as we plan for those significant future investments for our region. Next one is just a slide that we have some steps on how you can be involved, making sure if you're interested in receiving our news and updates. We have a distribution list there, sending emails at any time to our resiliency program, and following the website and public meetings that we constantly have. We now have our resilience coordination forum that is meeting quarterly. That also is an opportunity to engage and again collaborate for the achievement of those solutions that are needed for Florida. And thank you. I'm available for questions now, later, so please feel free to reach out at any time. That I will be more than happy to assist and provide data and answers to any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. That was very good. If you have any questions or comments for Carolina, please raise your hand.
Hands raised.
Okay, no questions or comments for Carolina? Okay, thank you very much, Carolina.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much.
Next on the agenda, we have Nancy, and she's going to tell us the next steps in our planning process to close out the workshop today. Go ahead, Nancy.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Nancy Demonstrani. I'm the Lower East Coast Water Supply Plan Manager. And today, as Tom just said, I'm going to briefly cover our next steps for the Lower East Coast Water Supply Plan update. Basically, I'm just going to go over briefly where we are now and where we will be heading in the upcoming months prior to a request for final plan approval by the governing board. Next slide. As Tom mentioned before, there are now draft chapters 1, 2, and 3, as well as Appendix A, that are available for review and comment. These documents are available on our Lower East Coast Water Supply Planning webpage at the link shown on the screen. Written comments are due to me by the close of business on September 29th, 2023. Your comments are very valuable to us, and we encourage everyone to provide input to us to ensure the most accurate information is captured in the plan. Your comments will be reviewed and considered for incorporation into the plan as appropriate. Next slide. This was also shown earlier. This is our plan update schedule. Today, we are holding our second stakeholder meeting. Early chapter and appendix review comments are due again at the end of September to me. In December through January of this year, the entire draft plan will be available for public review and comment. And following that, in February, we will hold our last final stakeholder number 3 meeting, and we will also present the draft to the governing board. In March, the public comment period ends, so you will have from December or January until March 1st to provide comments back on the final draft plan. And then we will request governing board approval of the final plan in April, actually on April 15th of 2024. And next slide. And if you have any other questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me, Tom, or Mark. Our emails are on the right-hand corner at the bottom. And now I'll open it up to questions and public comment. Thank you for participating today.
If anybody has a question or comment before we close, please raise your hand.
Yep, Tommy Stroud has his hand raised.
Hey, Tommy, go ahead.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great, thanks. Yeah, I just have a brief comment. First, I'd like to thank everybody for the presentations. Those were excellent, and it was a great summary of kind of all the factors that play into putting this plan together. And I guess from Lake Worth Drainage District's perspective, the one concern we have is really related to the pending implementation of the new lake regulation schedule. The environmental impact statement, the modeling that supported that seemed to indicate there could be an increase in locally triggered water shortages, and during those drier periods, Lake Worth Drainage District and Water Conservation Area 1 would experience generally lower water levels, and so that's concerning to us. So again, I don't have a question, but just as we move forward, those are some of the issues that we're going to be looking closely at that affect Service Area 1, Southeastern Palm Beach County area. So thank you for the opportunity to make the comment, and look forward to participating with y'all as we move forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tommy. Appreciate that.
No other hands raised.
No other hands raised. Okay. Well, with that, just want to thank our presenters, our panelists, and everyone who joined us today and participated in the workshop. As a reminder, in a few days, the workshop recording will be made available to you on YouTube. Thanks again for participating, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon.